This right here is a laptop that sums up everything wrong with the state of the computing industry nowadays. This is an HP Stream 13 ultra cheap Windows 10 or Windows 8 laptop, and it is one of the worst types of laptops you can buy nowadays. These super ultra cheap pieces of crap that come with Windows on them. Now, these are essentially the spiritual successor to the netbooks, but somehow even worse, because at least on the netbooks, the RAM and storage was socketed. This, soldered. You've got 32 gigs of storage that's soldered onto the motherboard. It's actually an SD card soldered here. And you also have 2 gigs of RAM, which is soldered. You can't upgrade it. Good luck. And these are designed to be ultra cheap. They're ultra thin at least, because, you know, after Steve Jobs showed off the MacBook Air, every laptop nowadays has to be super ultra thin. But, guess what? It's pretty cheap. It's really cheap. You've got the usual cheap plastic laptop issues. You've got the hinge. It's probably going to break in a few years, at most. You've got the touchpad, which will probably end up dying, and that's a pain to use. It's this like huge square. Like this is the kind of touchpad that Apple fanboys think all PC touchpads are. This touchpad right here. And a keyboard, which is, at least it's better than the butterfly keyboard, and it's usable. Okay, the keyboard's actually one of the few good things about this laptop, and the screen's acceptable. But the storage and RAM that's soldered in kills this thing. And if you don't believe me, 32 gigs ain't enough to do anything. There are a lot of programs that take up 32 gigs of storage and more. If you install Adobe, you're taking up gigs of storage. If you install Visual Studio, you can't even do that on this thing because this has so little storage. Especially as you check off more and more components. And you install like games and stuff, you ain't going to do that on here unless you pop a micro SD card in here. And that's not changing the fact that Windows Update is going to eat gigs and gigs of this system up like Pac-Man or something. But, despite the fact that this system is absolute bottom of the barrel garbage, I'm going to show you a very easy way to make this thing more usable. That doesn't involve this video devolving into a shitty clickbait video of me throwing this laptop out the window or smashing it with a bunch of sledgehammers. No. This is a way to make this laptop more usable, and it's called Linux. So, let's turn this thing on. Escape. So as we can see here, this laptop has a Celery N2840 and 2 gigs of RAM, and it only has 32 gigs of storage. Look, it's even called SDW32G. So you could probably use an SD card if the onboard storage ever craps out, which it probably eventually will. But I've installed Ubuntu on this thing. And what do you know? Everything on this laptop works great. It's nice. It's doing the boot up process, of course. You can see here, it's loading. Nothing too special. It doesn't even say what CPU it is. That's how cheap this is. It just says Intel inside, just like on a Chromebook. In fact, this thing was made to compete with Chromebooks, which are literally bottom-of-the-barrel, useless pieces of crap that are essentially glorified internet appliances. They're made for going on the internet and nothing else. But this, you can actually make it somewhat like a computer. I've put my password in. And it doesn't take long at all to get to the desktop. Especially for something as junk as this is. Now, these laptops are essentially the spiritual successor to those crappy netbooks you saw a few years ago. Except they're worse, because at least in those, the storage and RAM were socketed. But in this, they're not, and they kind of make it a little bit hard to replace. So yeah, this laptop is acceptable. But it seems to work fine. Video seems to be 60 Hertz. I can open up the internet and go on here. and it makes it a little bit more useful. You want to open up the internet, you want to open up Telegram or something, you can do it on this thing with 32 gigs of storage. You don't need a lot of space with Linux. Linux runs great. Updates really don't make your system run slow and take 10 hours to complete like with Windows 10. And you can surf the web on this thing too, okay? You can surf the web and buy yourself a better laptop for not too much. You can go on eBay and search for a ThinkPad X220. Actually, I typed in X200. I meant to type in X220. Whoops. With Linux, you can make this laptop fast enough to go on eBay and get yourself, for the price of one of these new, an X220. Or less than that, actually. You can get one where somebody already put Windows 10 on it and a 500 gig storage device. Or you can get one with no hard drive or no OS. So if we type in no OS, but yeah, as you can see, this thing browses the web just fine with Linux on here, and that's the point I'm trying to make. With this laptop, you can browse the web just fine on here. And here's another fun fact I'll show you in a second. So you can get these laptops without the hard drives pretty cheap. Look, 89 bucks, buy it now. Cheaper than this. And you can get like a Micro Center SSD that'll fly on that. But here's something I managed to do. I got the Wi-Fi working on here. There's nothing plugged in. Nothing plugged in. It's just working. Now you might be wondering how I did that. Well, what I did was when I installed it, I checked to install the proprietary drivers. But if you go into, let's go in here. As you can see here, I actually managed to get the Wi-Fi working because it uses the WL driver. And if you check to use proprietary drivers when installing Ubuntu Mate, it will actually grab those drivers as well. If you're not using it, you'll have to install them manually, which can depend on your Linux distro. But as you can see, this laptop does work decently on Linux. I mean, there's only 2 gigs of RAM, so if you're going to nail this with something like Discord, this thing is really going to start slowing down, especially if you load up more and more apps, and it starts to stress the 2 gig of RAM that's not upgradable, mind you, because they decided to solder it. Now, with newer ones, they have 4 gigs of RAM, and that's much more usable for Linux. But at the same time, you're basically polishing a crappy laptop. But if this is the only laptop you're stuck with, definitely give Linux a shot on one of these laptops. But don't go out of your way buying one of these for Linux. Just purchase an X220 or something, and you'll like it a lot more. My mom bought me a computer and it can't even run Toho, so I gotta play MAME instead. Oh yeah, I'm a gamer now, Mom. I'm a pro gamer. Professional gamer. I'm gaming. So, I just unplugged this, and I'm getting 6 hours and 45 minutes of battery life, and that's not if I'm straining the CPU or anything from doing like web browsing and stuff on here, because you do more intense web browsing, it's going to stress this thing like crazy. But, and of course, as one knows, even quote-unquote efficient CPUs, if they're slow, you're going to be losing a lot of battery from doing stuff on here because you're basically using more power to do this stuff over time because of how slow it is. So yeah. But hey, at least it's really thin, I guess. So yeah, all in all, these laptops are pretty crap as you'd expect, but at least with Linux you can make them more usable to an extent. And that's all that needs to be said about this setup. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.